Hello, I'm Hannah, and I've walked a path few could understand. My community cast me out because I refused to bow to their false god, but my faith has led me to something much greater. Through years of prayer, I believed God would bring deliverance to those who abandoned me. Little did I know He had a plan beyond what I could ever imagine. The Path of the Chosen Warriors is a story of spiritual warfare, unwavering faith, and the warriors God raises up in the most unexpected places. It's about standing strong when all seems lost and knowing that God's purpose will always prevail. When you subscribe to Marsha Lee Patterson's mailing list, you'll get the full PDF version of this free audio series, plus a battle plan template to help you stand firm in your own spiritual journey. Just check the link in the description. A new chapter will be uploaded every Thursday, so be sure to subscribe and stay connected. If this story speaks to your heart, leave a comment and share this series with others who need encouragement. Now let's begin Chapter 1, Homecoming. Ruth Patterson exited her car and stared at the house where she grew up. She felt blissful now that she was home for good, after 10 long years of medical school. She closed her eyes and inhaled the freshness of the wind. She was grateful for all the trees, which had always kept the community cool even in the summer. The city where she had studied was dry and dusty year-round, keeping most people inside. Ruth thought of all the friends she had left behind as she walked to the back of the car to retrieve her luggage. Who, she wondered, still lives here? She had lost touch with so many. A sudden eagerness came over her as her mind drifted to the one person she had missed the most. Joshua Stevenson. Ruth, a male voice called from behind her. She almost dropped the suitcase as excitement filled her. Josh! Ruth pivoted and ran straight into his arms. I missed you so much. Tears streamed down her face. She hugged him tight and pressed her cheek against his, eyes closed, celebrating the moment. They embraced for a long while before parting, staring at each other. She caressed his cheek when she spotted a few tear stains, just before he covered her hand with his own and smiled. I'm glad you're home, Ruth. Joshua took her luggage as they walked toward the house. He had tended it for her while she had been away at school. A Russian family had rented it for almost 8 years, but after receiving a large inheritance, they returned to Russia. It had been vacant for the past year and a half. As Ruth followed him, she noticed everything looked nearly as she'd left it. Puzzled, she stopped him as they entered the living room. Josh, did you not put my parents' things in storage while that Russian family lived here? Yes, of course, but I couldn't let you return home to a house that would feel strange to you. Could I? He smiled. She folded her arms. But how did you know I was coming? I wanted to surprise you. The Lord told me to fix your house up, that you'd be returning soon. His response made her smile. Ruth knew of his devotion to God. Ever since that day when his pilot father had taken him flying for the first time, he'd started to ask questions about the existence of the Creator. Thanks, Josh, and for not putting back too much of Mom and Dad's stuff into the house, she sighed. Come on, Ruth. Who knows you as I do? I remember how hard it was for you to lose them, and I hate to see you all miserable and depressed. Most of their things are still in the basement for you to go through when you are ready. Ruth tipped on her toes and kissed Joshua on his cheek. She smiled as she stared into his eyes. You were always so thoughtful. So were you. He smiled back. She stepped further into the living room. Joshua had put each photo back in their original places, and seeing them again brought up so many memories of her parents. A picture on the fireplace soon caught her attention. Ruth kept her eyes fixed on the portrait as she approached. In the photo, her parents had sandwiched her cheeks with a big kiss while her face beamed brightly. It was her 16th birthday, the last one they had taken together. She stifled a tear as she thought of how much their lifestyles had helped influence her decision to become a doctor. All the missionary trips they had taken her on as a child, where she saw them exercising their Christian duty to help others in need with the gifts God had blessed them with. Ruth picked up the photo, continuing to stare at it. A multitude of emotions began to hit her all at once, and her heart rate increased. She felt the room getting smaller and smaller as the horror of that fateful day hit her once more like a bolt of lightning, and she froze. It was her parents' 30th wedding anniversary, and they had gone out to celebrate after a hard week at work. On their way home, they saw an injured cyclist lying near the side of the road. They approached him and saw he bled from both his stomach and head. The cyclist looked so weak from his injuries. He couldn't alert them that his attackers remained nearby as they stopped to help him. As soon as her parents got to the man, her dad Howard checked the severity of his injuries to see whether he could be moved and taken to the hospital, while her mum Christina called the police. "Give us all your valuables or end up like him." A loud, raspy voice came from behind them, scaring them. They turned toward the voice and froze at the sight of two men, guns pointed at them. Both men were tall and thick and had fierce eyes. They looked to be in their early 20s. One had a tattoo that ran over his entire left arm, while the other carried a nasty scar across his face. The sight caused Christina to drop the phone and throw her hands up in fear. "Please, allow us to take him to the hospital," Howard pleaded. His hand shook as he extended his watch and wallet towards them. The men laughed. "Shut up," the tattooed man said roughly. "He can make it. I'm a doctor and can keep him alive until we get to the hospital." The physician in Howard couldn't bear to see someone die when they could still be saved. His persistence angered the men, and the scarred one pulled the trigger, killing the cyclist. "Well, now you can't," the man's raspy voice sneered. Tears streamed down Howard's face as he felt the men's coldness. It was the first time he'd come this close to such wicked people. He grabbed his wife and held her near, praying aloud to God. "Father, please have mercy on these two young men. Give them wisdom and guidance to do the right thing in this situation, so that you can save their souls from hell." The two men looked at each other and laughed. "These people are crazy. They are praying for us when they are the ones about to die." The tattooed man snickered as they turned to walk away. The scar-faced man, who seemed to be the brains of the two, noticed the phone on the ground and picked it up. He placed it to his ear. "Hello." Anger and fear clouded his face as he discovered the police on the other end. He dropped the phone and crushed it with his feet, then stared icily at Howard and Christina. His breathing intensified as his rage engulfed him. His co-conspirator shouted to him, "Kill them! Kill them! Or they will identify us to the police." Howard and Christina watched as the scar-faced man paced anxiously. They could tell he was fighting something on the inside, almost as if he wanted to kill them but couldn't. To their surprise, he turned from them and walked away. "Are you crazy? We can't just leave them like this," the tattooed man shouted. "They can identify us." Howard and Christina watched as one man walked away without looking back, while the other went very reluctantly. Their already pounding hearts now began to pound even harder. Both stared at each other as if they could sense death approaching, and they embraced. They closed their eyes, then heard loud explosions, whimpering from the burning sensation they soon felt. But they kept their eyes closed as they listened to the two men arguing, then a vehicle driving off. They opened their eyes. Christina screamed at the sight of blood. Howard had been shot twice. One bullet in the leg and the other on his side, while Christina was shot in the shoulder. His leg soon gave way, and he slumped hard to the ground, groaning aloud. Christina screamed again and dropped down next to him. She lifted his head and cushioned it on her lap. "Hon, look at me." Tears streamed down her face as she caressed his cheek with trembling fingers. Howard opened his eyes, lifting his hand to wipe her cheek. "Sweetheart, we'll be fine." He gave her a hopeful smile. "Reach into my pocket and get my phone." Christina took hold of his hand instead and pressed it against her cheek. "Sweetheart, hurry," he uttered in a weak voice. She retrieved the phone and quickly called an ambulance. The cops had quickly located their whereabouts with the help of Christina's cell signal while the whole incident occurred. The ambulance arrived minutes later. Even though both had survived surgery to remove the bullets, Howard died a few weeks later from an infection. Christina followed 2 months after from a broken heart. It seemed she couldn't face life without her husband, despite making a complete physical recovery. "Ruth, Ruth," Joshua whispered near her ear as he gently shook her. Startled, Ruth gasped. The portrait flew from her hand, shattering as it crashed. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the broken pieces. Her heart stabbed as she thought of how her mum had given up on life and left her all alone. Ruth knelt and removed the photo from the pieces of broken glass. When she stood again, she handed it to Joshua. "You were reliving what your parents told you about that day, weren't you?" She nodded as she wiped her tears. Joshua took the picture, staring between it and her before he pulled her into his arms and held her close. That's it for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. If this story speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Marshally would love to hear from you. See you in the next chapter.